presentation on a thumb drive?
I don't have.
On a thumb drive?
Yes, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Hi there. How are you today?
Fine, how are you?
Good. I'm Roberta. I'm going to be clerking today. I'm the town clerk. Cody's not here today. And I hear you're doing a presentation. Hi, Eric. You as well. And you have it on a thumb drive? That would be great. That's the best way for us to display is
Yeah.
if you bring it on a thumb drive or if you send it to us.
I think there's a couple of things. It's great, 2 forward and other else. It's funny how inevitable. Sounds like it. Say it one.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, we're gonna take. Yeah, I mean, for them, it might be easier. So when they create a folder for it.
Yeah, I think we mentioned her and then you'll just place it on like your desktop, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and then she'll just give it to us back.
Oh,
So
okay.
she'll just have the folder.
Yeah, it was, you know, you should learn this.
Yeah.
Well, oh, you were
John,
doing very well, thanks. Happy New Year.
happy new year.
I'm sitting in for Cody today.
I am.
Okay.
Yes.
I said on the note. Is he out for some period of time or just today?
This week.
Oh, do you know, are we gonna talk about the next meeting's schedule today? It's not on the agenda. But we talked about it last time. I thought we said that we were gonna do a doodle poll to just confirm it because a couple of us said that there were a couple of dates that were in the proposal on December 17th. And I know that not everybody could make every evening. Yes.
Okay. So that was in the minutes then. So January 13th,
We'd say,
but he doesn't note anything else.
yeah.
Because
There's uncertainty about the forward meetings.
okay.
And
I know that on the agenda today is agenda items and committee schedule. So
Okay.
that can be discussed at that meeting, at today's meeting.
I do have a copy of it, but
I have more in the
Somewhere.
hallway. I can grab a
good.
copy if you'd like.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah, you can discuss it. It's on the agenda, so you can discuss it.
Okay. And you don't have a copy of what he proposed.
I don't
I might
see
be-
that in his minutes. That is in the packet. I have no idea. No idea. So this is, all right. No, I don't. Do you want to try emailing it to me?
I'm just gonna give it to you. I think my laptop's just running slow. It's on here.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Just,
Okay.
it's the only PowerPoint presentation we'll put in our these days.
Yours.
Well, I was there.
Concerned about what's actually happening. Hi, how are you?
Hello, how are you, Krista? Good, thank you. Happy New Year.
I
Hey, how are you? Yeah.
Good, getting my laptop, and projects to the trash can, so I can just throw it. It's unworking. Hopefully it'll just. I'm just gonna wanna do Windows update where you're. Kind of, it has this habit of almost burning up when it's very hot, and I didn't run a fan with it tonight. of those documents.
Okay, we're gonna start meeting.
We're playing together, Sean.
Where is that coming from?
It's someone that's infiltrated your system.
Let's see here, sorry, like Bill Sanders,
Here.
Fountain Father,
Here.
Richard Smith, here, that's it.
Here.
This is.
Ex-officio member Ray Cropper,
Here.
Rebecca,
Yeah.
Loretta.
I'm town clerk, so I'm just clerking today.
No, it would be Lisa. Lisa, agency, yeah.
The next item is meeting, you. The first is the motion to go through the minutes from Tuesday, October 28th. We roll call vote, John Potter. Ryan.
Aye.
Chair votes. The next one is, their approval, their motion to approve the minutes of Tuesday, December 2nd. Okay, is there a second? Any discussion? So I saw several errors in there, just typographical, grammatical, and names misspelled or out, and then on page 2, there's a paragraph for the vote. There's it says emphases instead of emphasize. So minor things, but worth a check, especially for racing.
I'm sorry, page 2.
For the December 2nd one,
Right.
page 2 at the very top, and then actually a few places throughout, I don't think have to wrong. The rated out, it's spelled to Flato.
Yep, I can,
And then at the bottom of page 2, the paragraph before the vote, it's it says emphases
mhm,
instead of emphasize.
got it.
So,
As amended?
yeah, and then it's there. Do I have to call that again?
Yes, so as
So
amended.
is there a motion to approve the minutes as? Okay, roll call vote. Bill Stanton? Donald? Richard?
Yeah.
Genesee? And the chair votes aye. Okay, and then finally, is there a motion to approve the minutes from Wednesday, December 2nd, 2025?
So who?
There's a second? Second. Any discussions? Okay, roll call vote, Bill Sanders?
Say.
Donald Potter?
Aye.
Okay, Cassidy? Aye. And the chair votes aye. Okay, the next item is a new business, and the first item on the agenda is a presentation by the landscape architect Beta Group. And Ed, I don't know if you wanted to introduce this at all, or?
I mean, Eric is back again. He has followed the request of the committee and is prepared to give you, I think, a current conditions assessment and report, an overview of where you are, and give you some guidance as moving forward.
Excellent, great to see you, thanks for being here.
Right.
Just bear with me for just 1 minute, Eric, please.
Yes,
One quite sure how it works.
your colleague was with you?
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry, Eric, can you turn the microphone on the podium, please?
Yeah, right, so your account. So we've had a little bit of time to do a little bit of inventory work, so I went today, and I just talked about what we've seen. It's set the stage for some of the discussions forward. I think we'll talk about this later, but we're looking ahead to a working session, right, where we're on the table with you folks in February, I hope. Are the surveys complete? Are they in this week? Is that right?
They are finished as of January 22nd. And so. Be 40 minutes a minute, and I'm not exactly sure how long that will take to actually analyze results. I don't anticipate that it's gonna take a lot of time. But so, yeah, we're hoping that. Our first meeting in February, which I believe is February 10th, again, we'll confirm that later in this meeting. That's when we'll be shooting to have kind of more of that workshop.
That's great. So the intent of today's discussion is to set the stage for that, and we'll use this as background. Or you can go ahead and advance. Yeah, that'd be great. So this is sort of an outline of what I thought we would talk about today. Just kind of touching on why we are coming here. We do a little piece kind of just by the numbers, looking at some statistics of the site itself, which is kind of an interesting way to look at it. How we're using the land, and then set the framework for the discussions that we'll have in February. Go ahead with that slide, please. So just an overview of the site itself. And I would think from this point, once we gotta jump in and more of a ground level sort of walk through and talk about some of the existing conditions. But from an overall perspective, sort of why people come here, we want to talk a little bit about the intrinsic values to just kind of think the underpinnings of this planning process. Next slide, please. So, people, of course, we all know this, but it's good to be sort of reacquainted with why, and what's important in land planning is how you're protecting and thinking about these resources. People come here for the natural character. Go ahead, next slide, please. Scenic values, the ocean views, next slide. The shoreline access itself, the beaches, the cobble beaches. Next slide, please. Waterfront access as well for down to the pier, boat ramp, valley halls as well as that kind of interface with the ocean are all reasons that people are attracted here. Go ahead, next one, please. And intrinsic values of like the characteristics of the shoreline. Kayak launches, so you can see the paddle boards and so on are missing off the racks, but waterfront access piece of it. Next slide. And again, the use of the Martians. For Getty by the numbers. Melissa, if you want to take a look at this, it's just a part where maybe you could give it just kind of overview. I feel like this is a little out of sequence, but we can go ahead.
Everyone deserves that. Talk a bit. Things that it's on is just to visualize. So obviously the park is about 41 acres. Your website says that, website. It also mentions the 75 RV sites as well as 26 tent sites. But in addition to that, we also wanted to look at what was offered for coastline, beach access, as well as hiking trails. So we found that there are about half a mile of trails throughout the park itself. Most of them occur on the west side. There's also a unique riding trail right in North Marsh. As far as the coastline goes, there's about a little over a mile of coastline. But there's a large portion of it that does not include accessible coastline. So you have the beaches to the north and the south, as well as up to at the north you have the dock area to access the water. So the main areas that are accessible are marsh areas as well as the cliff areas more up to the west of the trends. There's also some fortifications on site, which again, some of it's obvious, especially in the portion where you first started in to the left. And then right next to the restroom, that's closer to the south of the site, the forts that are very heavily covered with vegetation, they're also kind of mounted to the earth. And then there's also one smaller fortification up to the west. So just trying to make sure that we all know that's there. You know, you go to the next, one, sorry. So these are the existing conditions, just kind of pointed out on that. We have again, the gatehouse when you first enter, there's also the pump out there as well. Of course, there's the pavilion when you first drive in. And again, just going from south to north of the site, once you keep going north, you see those different RE sites as well as the tent sites. The CISF campus is there, and as you get further north, you get to that, the boat ramp as well as the dock. Next. So these are just some existing conditions photos that we've taken recently with our site visits out there. This also follows the south to north sequence. So here we obviously have the tent sites when you first come in, the lower tent sites. This is the entrance, so this is what people are welcome with when they come into the site. There's not necessarily any signage here, it's more of just this kind of, entrance with the stone pillars on either side. And you're met with the existing fort that's right towards the entrance. The pavilion is also one of the first things you see when you come into the site. So they have the pavilion itself as well as the little walk out to the beach area. Used for events, we could rent it out. This is at the very top of where the pavilion is, so the west further side. You can also see it's really used with the bonfires during, Halloween and other events. So this is really a great viewing spot for the site itself, combined with some amenities such as benches. And also leading down to the water. This also leads up to some of the shrimp sites on the west. Here, the next one. So as we get closer to the RV sites, we're met with mostly open land, but there is this small grove of, deciduous trees that kind of provide shade, especially in the summer for those campsites. But again, it is one of the only spaces with, shade provided by natural plants. Next. Everyone's probably familiar with this view. This is the restroom towards the south. It's right against that fortification towards the entrance. So this is one of the bigger visual eyesores, I suppose, driving in and out the site. Next. Again, the open land for each of the sites, with all the hookups, so this is the larger portion of what too, so it's excited. Next. And this is obviously the part of the kind of peninsula that goes out to the dock, as well as that northern beach. Next. And these are the tram systems, and then the photo all the way to the left, that's the smaller part of the fortification, that's along that trail. So if you're not on the tram systems often, you really don't know what's there, but. Again, narrow trails, they're more sort of like footpaths, and some of these lead to those more dangerous rocky coasts along the west. Not if you're really not supposed to be going down, but they do. Next. This is the Kit Ray nature trail along the marsh. And trails over here are very similar, it's a little more wider but similar to the trails in the west. Next. And this is just the overall site, again, just kind of taking a little look out at everything that you just. I'm gonna pass it back over to Eric.
Thanks, Alyssa. I want to apologize too. I see this footnote says preliminary in the corner. So Alyssa and I both work remotely from the island, and so I'm not quite sure whether we had that server glitch today. So this is essentially the presentation, but there is a more refined version I would consider this a draft. And we can talk about how to just get you the updated version at the conclusion of the presentation. And I apologize for the footnote. But the content is essentially here and just continue to work. And then again, I apologize for Eric, what's at the sides. So thinking about before, this is from the CRI index, so it's looking at risk. This is associated with a 2-foot sea level rise. So what it does is it forecasts
what the inundation would look like in about 75 years. And so not a big surprise, just like Mackerel Cove will be cut off. Fort Getty will be cut in half, without some consideration as far as raising the elevation of the access road. And it's a useful tool just to kind of look at this. I think we're all kind of aware of it, but the topography sets the stage. For it to be sort of an isolated island in the future, without some considerations into the infrastructure. You can go to the next slide, please. This is just a look at the FEMA map, looking at the velocity zones, the flood zones. So as you can see, essentially similar to Mackerel Cove, the center is inundated in a major flood event. This was considered as part of the design of the Regis Pavilion that was done, the restrooms there were designed to be removable, so if a catastrophic event is coming, there's ways to sort of work around it. But it does give you the delineation of sort of the areas of risk. I think what's interesting on this one in particular is where the guardhouse is, and as the approach as you come in. You notice those velocity zones extend to the east, so up past the guardhouse area, so it also maybe informs how you might approach some of the planning in the area of the tent site, for example. So it's interesting and it's important to really get some mapping and get talk about it more. But if we were to think about additional structures or some maintenance facility or something like that, these maps are important to kind of look at where is an area of least amount of risk if we were to introduce new structures or add infrastructure. Right, so. Next slide, please. And this is just taking a look at where the velocity zone, it's based on the contours and the elevation, so where it strikes the western side of the park, and then there's a jurisdictional setback from CRMC 200 feet. That they have jurisdictional control level, and that leaves around 9 acres of land kind of in the center of the site. Doesn't mean we can't work on the edges or make improvements to the edges, it's just regulatory considerations are tighter around the park itself.
Does the restroom facility fall in there? You can't really tell from
The 200, like right at the edge of it as it sits down behind that area, right? On the next slide, for this one. Speaking of the battery is a significant structure, and it, in some ways it kind of divides the park in half. It's a large area of land, it's over an acre in size. It's sort of revegetated with a lot of invasive plants. The terrain is challenging, the topography is challenging. Something I think we'll think about going forward. Next slide, please. This is a view of what the top of the battery looked like when it was operational. So particularly this area at the center of the park, it's interesting opportunities here to, I think, kind of unify the park, unify some of the spaces more broadly. You can see the fortification on the left, it's maybe underappreciated opportunity for interpretation, perhaps. Image on the right is the casemate where the gun emplacements were. Also sort of challenging terrain. Maybe it's an opportunity to rethink that area and make it more of a contributing piece of the landscape than it is today. It's incredible views from up there. There should be really spectacular views to the west and the south, and it's right now sort of a dangerous and fragmented place where I don't think a lot of activity is formally programmed, but I think we should look at it and sort of maybe rethink that area and how it's being used currently. Next slide.
for questions at the end.
Sorry, no, you can go right there. Sure, ask this question, please, want to slide in this earlier.
Yeah. So when you say rethink it, what do you mean? What is in your mind that?
Excuse me, I'm getting over. Well, I think I can go back to the slide. But I think there's an opportunity, I feel like there's an opportunity to interpret the three-dimensional, sort of command center there. Whether it's a restoration or access or some other way of considering right now, there's sort of openings and then people are going into it. Maybe animals are in it, certainly in a state of decline. Can be preserved, protected, enhanced, maybe, or at least interpreted. On the casemate side with the gun emplacements, maybe there's an opportunity to fill or adjust the grade over them and make a more uniform surface. I think it's well documented as to what the fortifications are. think there's opportunity to maybe then revegetate, maybe do some more, whether it's tent sites or something else up on that plateau. I think just sort of living with the terrain and the way it is what we've sort of done, because we've inherited the land and it's just sort of, didn't know how to make it work and it was complicated, so it's become overgrown. But it's a huge repository of invasive plants. There's not a lot of habitat there, and the habitat value. It's probably some of the highest land and most interesting land on the site, and I think. I'm not coming today with an answer for it, but I think re-looking at it, as a group would be useful. There's a lot of opportunity there. So, the fort also creates some challenges both on the east side, you can see as that buttress wall comes down, and on the west side where people walk through between the camping sites and the open space of the pavilion. And I think Melissa showed you the picture of even further over to the west, path is like how coming through there. If you're walking back and forth to the beaches or the pavilion, you're walking between that buttress and buses and cars and trailers and campers and boat trailers coming through. So it's a lot of activity here. There's not a lot of connectivity to kind of unify the park. And I know we're looking at a lot of different things, but I think in particular, looking at the fort and understanding the fort better, I think you can work on these connections and improve it for people, pedestrians, bicycles. Find a little more balance and creating more connectivity. Going to the next slide, this is bring so this is a preliminary. What we started trying to do is understand their current land uses and sort of the way that we've used the park over the last 50 years. So down at the bottom, we see others essentially vegetation, edge areas, sort of marginal spaces that define a lot of the perimeter. So we have about 20, you can round that, you can say like maybe 20 acres, so roughly half of the site are these sort of vegetated edges, Kid Ride Nature Trail areas on the western side of the site. So there's about 20 acres, again, kind of round numbers of sort of active uses of the park itself. So you start off thinking over 41 acres in size, but really we're not like about 20. So then let's take a look at what's happening at 20. And that's what this chart's trying to do. It's marked preliminary because we're working through it. And these are some rounding exercises here to just kind of aggregate land together and understand it. But you see the RV camping is around 6 acres, 14%. We see further down the tent camping is around 7%. And then from that, you kind of get into subcategories. I think the open grass areas and maybe 3 acres of open grass. And you can again kind of match up the colors of above. And you can see there's almost 3 acres of roadways. I don't know if they're quite fully defined in our chart yet, but the green space and the grass areas and the roadways are almost the same, not rich. So when we look at it, we really start to see how it's being utilized. Pavilions in there, a little over, just under an acre itself. There's the roadways at the bottom of 3 acres. You start to get a sense of how valuable each of these uses are, and that there's not a lot of land. And so when I talk about the battery that, an acre plus or minus its size, it's a significant piece of what we have to work with. And I think it's too big not to sort of think about what might be able to happen, on top of it, or at least some portions of the top of the battery. So this overview sort of sets the stage for some of the other, for the framework for land use planning and some things we'll talk about with the sites. But when you go through it, I think it's worth thinking about an RV camping 6 acres, 14 or 15%. Is that the right appropriation? If you're looking for a different kind of balance in the park, maybe some of these uses and the amount of space that they occupy get adjusted, in the future. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is what I just kind of talked over. It sort of introduced, about 50% of land is vegetated, and the remaining 50%, say 21 acres, it sort of breaks down like this. So 9 acres of RV and tent camping, about 3 acres of roadway, 3 acres of the maintained lawn. CISF campus, it has some shared agreements, roughly an acre and a half there. The pavilion area itself, another acre, and then the fortifications. And then those six items add up to about 90% of the land use. We need the roadways, we need all the roadways, I don't know, are the roadways in the right place? Probably not, because even some of them still work, probably yes, so I think there's things that. I guess use this as a roadmap to sort of explore. What are our current use patterns and then what do we think about these and is there room for adjustment or is it a wise idea to make some adjustments to the usage? Any questions about this material?
I'm curious, can you go back where you are slide? See. The 19 acres for the vegetation, you don't really have those colored, right? The grayish, that's all the right trail areas.
Yeah, they're not, and I think we have a better graphic, I think it's going. I can see, but it's about, as you described, it's sort of the marginal areas that we. I would say it's not the beaches, it's not the shoreline, but it's the western edge of the site, it's the wetland complex. The salt marsh, we get ready nature trail. It's the wetland area that wraps around the edge of the marsh up behind battery lighting. It's also the area of land to the south of the guardhouse. So it's in that block as well. So, we may choose to activate some of those vegetated areas. But the reason I showed you the floodplain map and the considerations of the velocity zone is. It looks like a lot of land there, and maybe it's great for tent camping and other things, but we gotta be balanced and thinking about the flood risk and other infrastructure, in that area. So we might be able to, maybe this 50% gets whittled down a little bit from the 19 acres. But the majority of it's land that's not gonna change its. As well.
I was wondering if in your beginning, similar to the roadway stuff, is it got a lot of vegetation, but it may be not the right places.
Right. A lot of it's protected because of buffer from the resource, so within the first 50 feet from the edge of the salt marsh. Okay, right, a lot of that really won't change much, nor on the western side. But I do think there's opportunity along the intersect as you come into the immediate south. That big rectangle of 8 acres. In terms of, is that always gonna stay like that, or is there an opportunity to expand the tent campus? Maybe a maintenance facility if there is one for the park, it wants in that area, but maybe out of the flood. Resting areas.
Question, have you gone back to the 2006 land use plan? Take a look at that. Because I was. Commencing. Sure. Number of interesting suggestions. One was to that 42 RV sites. Beside that lower area. I'm just wondering if you've taken a look at that plan. They also had various ideas for us and new gatehouse will be RV.
So yes, I have looked at the plan and I think that's probably. What I thought we'd talk about in February is take some of those ideas. If you could go back to slide of it, if you can grade back to the kind of color coded. Yeah, maybe one more beyond that, thank you. Yeah, so you're talking about the area that's sort of that long block, it's got sort of CISF at the northern end and brown, but the idea is like camper speed. I think, with the floodplain considerations and infrastructure considerations, you can still do something like that, so. Yeah, I think those ideas will come on that work, sorry, sit down and say. Again, these 15% of our, the site are RV campings to stay at that level and maybe it gets redistributed, to different areas. It's a good question.
Yes, a question of the sort of the topography depiction of the angle. When you talk about the RVs, did you have any, or Bill mentioned if you put RVs down there, did you put any idea or thought into what the expense would be if you had to level it off, if you wanted to grade it to less than 15 degrees for campers?
Right, we could look at that. So you would need to do some terracing, you're right, to be able to create terrain on the park. So we could look at that, could be done in completely shallower terraces rather than some bigger wall. Maybe it's done through stepping. That might be more cost effective than larger walls. We haven't got to that point of sort of proposing ideas, but I think the next time we sit down, I would think that we'd be looking at that, sketching those ideas, seeing how many spaces you might fit, seeing what kind of terracing might be required to do that.
But is there a slide that has the topography? You don't have one, do you?
I think, I don't know if we do or not, we do have the topography, we have a survey, yeah.
Okay.
In terms of like a cross section, if would you like to see sort of?
Yeah, so if you look at the picture, you said, well, there's 6 degree or 6 foot rise and 10 feet here, so we can't use that. So if you glance that, you could look at it and say, oh yeah, this area is probably better to claim with just by sight, looking at the elevation changes.
Yeah, I think that probably a solution that's a combination of minor changes in elevation to help allow some of those areas and make them more functional than they are today.
I think that it's the right cue for structures, when we can pick up the structures too, like the topography matters, and have the plus out. That's helpful.
Yeah, we have the full survey and we'll bring it, I think we'll cut out the cross sections down and see, where sort of the higher and flatter sections are, where it drops off. Adjustments would be needed to make it level up with RV sites or concepts there.
Now, can I go back up one question? You have a photo of proposed or guesstimated space of CRMC. You had the yellow line or whatever line that was on the map.
It's their jurisdictional, yeah,
Well, actually, it was that line. No, the only reason I'm asking, it looks like it runs just to the east of where the proposed new bathroom is. So it looks like the proposed new bathroom would be outside that range. If you took that line across, you'd see the new perk pipes that are there, and it looks like it falls right in the right.
Right.
Curious, is the design for the bathroom?
At risk, yeah.
Outside that line.
Right, if the way I understand it is inside. So, within this jurisdiction. So the way the line is defined is the coastal feature, the coastal resource is the delineation. So it's the top of the bedding. It's the edge of the salt marsh through wetlands, licensed scientists delineating that, the distance is from those edges back.
So you just get a 200 foot of.
Correct, from specific points, right?
Yeah.
So this survey dates back a ways, and usually after 3 or 5 years, you want to update the delineation of the wetland, because the wetland. It does change over time, even whether they realize it. Through things like marsh migration and marsh expands, some of the limits of the wetlands change, so. This project currently hasn't redelineated the wetlands, so we're using wetlands delineation that's older. And if we get to a point where, you want to move forward with construction, we would redelineate the wetlands, we would re-verify the 200 foot buffers.
So if we were to go forward with pretty much any changes, we would need to have that delineation or the forest, so we could.
Right, we've worked with you in the past, that we did work at the pavilion, and the pavilion was being done, so in that area of the pavilion that was required for the permit, we just updated the delineation for that area. So say for the rest of them, you could update a certain amount of delineation, although at some point it makes sense to just do the whole perimeter as one exercise, and maybe survey it, and you have the most current information for the entire site.
Okay, because it just seems whatever way you go forward, or if the town changes their mind in 10 years, it would be nice to have that delineation permanent, so you can look at, especially on the west side, and you say, well, tide's not coming up that high. Going on to the next
side
side.
delineation is not changing, right? No, you can make a good point, but I do think it has a time limit. It's only good for a couple of years before it would have to be. So, say for instance, you were going to contemplate taking on the restaurant project, you'd want to do that delineation, verify that line. I believe the Salem Center did the same thing, and they were working on their permitting their building. Because they redefined the line of the coastal feature, and then they pulled their setback to make sure they were clear where their limits were relative to the setback.
Okay,
The 2-part process. But that one's based on the mapping that we have and the last survey that we have, which is, about 10 years.
thanks.
Okay. You can go back through the last couple of slides. Sure. Okay, next one, please. So then we took a look at what was happening with the current breakdown of the RV sites. And so, what you can see is, we just kind of labeled these different blocks. In terms of the number of spaces in each block, And then roughly the space allocated per RV column on the far right. I'll say the outlier is D, and that's part of, wanting to just update this math a little bit. There's 6 spaces there, but that whole shaded footprint is not all RV spaces. The RV spaces aren't 7,400 square feet in size. There's something less than that, so that's kind of skewing our average space a little bit. But when we go through and update that, they think that those numbers will come down. I mean, average space is something more like 3,000 square feet. What I would say is that area D effectively though is sort of all campers because it's not really, the restaurant was there, it's not really used by other activities. The campers that occupy that space sort of control that sort of area. So section B, section C as well. It gives you a sense of how many spaces are in each of those locations.
Did you make any judgments when you were doing that about? This is right, this is excessive, these are small, these are big. I'm sure when the town first agreed to go forward with camping. Don't imagine, there's nothing I've read that would make me think that they put a lot of thought into where foot campers. And I think we just kind of follow that, to be an overstatement on my part. But I'm just curious if you were doing this today, is this where you would put campers? And in this configuration,
Assuming we wanted to have, right, so.
yeah, let's assume we would have campers.
So, I mean, I think that the pattern is just the inherited road pattern from the parents. So it works with the top RV, it's very efficient. I don't know if there's much consideration for view sheds and in the way the campers are positioned. Am I right that you two were fishermen in legality?
Yes.
Okay. So we did some work there for the state. A lot of the sites are angled, they're different positioning a little bit differently, they're a little easier to back in and out of for people that are moving their campers in and out. So maybe the road network would work, but the layout of the campers might be different. I think a lot of the geometries are awkward and they create shapes that aren't that useful, they're not contiguous. Maybe if you look at F, it's quite narrow. And maybe the best views in the campground are from location at F, but it's fairly tight through there in that road network. And then C and D seem to occupy a lot of prime real estate in terms of the park itself. So when we think about, how much land is being utilized by a camper, and that's a fine number. But when we think about 9 acres altogether with the 10 sites and so on, is it the right 9 acres? I think is what we're going to work through, right? And understand, is there opportunity, down the slope to do something in the overflow parking area? Are areas C and D more highly valuable or better utilized by broader public than campsites? Looking at the map and looking at some of the things I talked to you about earlier, having a continuous edge, having a nice wide green edge that the public can use. And we know we have challenges with that perimeter road, we have boat trailer parking, we have light congestion at the end, so we know we want to work on that edge and maybe having more green space along that edge. Makes a lot of sense as we come around to the circle. Some of the things that we're working on with the state and some of the other parks similar to this, is the idea of retreat, pulling back from the edge in some places. And, with some areas it might make sense to eventually pull back the edges. It's about 6 acres, you can see the map of it. Site, round. Questions or thoughts on this?
Great.
So we can come back to this. I mean, it's a starting point. So just understanding how we're using the land, we want to continue in this fashion. Is it in the right place? Where areas of opportunity? So you can go to the next slide. So we just got to put in a little diagram here. I think this is a sketch that based on some of the work we've done for fishermen, but they have diagonal sites, they have some boulder sites as well. I think the 2004 master plan
said the average size be 400 square feet. Maybe they're. That seemed a little conservative, based on where I think our numbers really are. So we're just looking at some different potential sizes for the sites and now understanding. Maybe the sites may be bigger and you have fewer sites, depending on the layouts and the geometries. If you average something about 3,400 a site, it'd be sort of around the number you are today, which is 75 sites. At Fisherman's, the pull through sites were about 2,900 square feet. So that's where the Ireland comes in. And leave that was a higher turnover location. The longer stay sites at Fisherman, where you go back in, we're up to 49 square feet. And the square foot's just really, like I said, it's a kind of blunt instrument. The topography matters and the geometry matters and the landscaping matters, so it all. But this is just kind of like a starting point to think about relative. You're right in kind of in the middle of the what you saw there for their smaller states. At 20, 50, and the larger size at 41.
Question, when you say 4,900 square feet, that's a lot of area for, are you talking that whole area for one camper and the green space between to the next camper?
Right.
And you're doing an average?
So that's right, at the average of Fisherman. So Fisherman's site had, when you back in, there's a pad and patio. Green space around it was kind of privatized, so that's some fine things. Some of the mitigation, so. It's really dependent on topography overall, of your land, but the larger sites at Fisherman go up to that side.
But is it campsite space or is it open space? Because 4,900 square feet for an RV park. For an RV park, even with a deck and an outlet next to it, seems an excessive amount. Would that, a lot of that be considered more open space?
Or around the edges, yeah, open space around, but it's sort of private space associated with the camp site. So it's the RV footprint, it's the patio, the terrace space outside, it's the green space. Sort of in the diagram, you can kind of see the line of plants in between. It's about 50 by 75, those shapes. To give you a rough idea, so that's 3,800 square feet. And then fishing is if you're up against the salt marsh or something like that, you might have more footprint available to you than others. So I was just giving you the range from 28 to 50 to 49. At fishing, in terms of what those sizes are.
So I did look at not specific beach campgrounds, and they sent us their survey of their sites. They're much smaller. It's 30%. They did say it'd be back again. So that's okay. They have no vegetation. Right, no vegetation.
I think the Charlestown Breachway was also a model that you could look at. I think suspect it's also very tight. The piece I'm familiar with is more like apartment, so. What I don't know is what's the deal if you were to consider reducing or adjusting sites. Is there a higher value of having more space or better aesthetic or better setting? Against amenities, so can you do the same with bus sites? I think is some.
Would you think about what happens when the campers aren't there? One community member wrote specifically about the off season and these campers leave and then it's just people up there now. I'm sure you have. It's just kind of very unattractive. There are those cement slabs around and so there's a lot of people that use getting off season and what that experiences.
Yeah, I think there's room for improvement.
That's for sure.
I think but most of us like the off-season.
Yeah.
That's some of the nicest time to be, as we talk about those intrinsic values, that we
Yeah.
people solve with the open views, the what space. I think like the graphic on the screen shows you planting, providing definition of those spaces, would add some aesthetic value, but we have to balance this, but basically take away and, potentially introduce some. I think a lot of the geometry out there, a lot of the infrastructure is inherited, so I think purposeful infrastructure, being more purposeful layout. I think we could look at alternative materials over under the campers, perhaps we could do that as a, or maybe more stern maybe system, where we're seeing grass instead of, just a concrete stuff. I think there's ways to approach it that just have a greener, more sort of nature based. I'll look up what the interface would be and for the roadways and the roadway network too, because in terms of a resize and that's certainly realigned different. So yeah, I think plantings would make a big difference. I think it would start to naturalize the city. But for a lot of it's like at least people that have been on the island viewing that has been a goal. It's been largely passionate before than before. Been largely an open profile with plantings at the edges. I think if we go into the center and that's the definition of stuff, we sort of cautious.
I think too, is like thinking about it as like a purpose space, right? It's a dedicated campsite that can board on it.
Yeah, and I think if we go, or you can look at C and D. If you think differently about the way the campers are laid out, those two corners. The multi-purpose space maybe comes more of that area. So if you're not having campers on that that northwestern edge. And maybe the campers are more consolidated, maybe it's down slow. So they don't have to be as multi-purpose if we're assigning more land, reassigning land to the more public use, then maybe the campgrounds can stay the way they are. And they don't have to do too many other things, maybe we can make them geometrically nicer, improve landscape, improve create some habitat, maybe. And make it more natural setting for people to camping in. And then those bigger areas, see and leaving. One of the things that struck me, there's not a playground on this site. So if we want people in the islands, use it more, maybe that's an phase that would be talked about, that it'll occupy a space like C and D, away from where the central piece of the campground is. So maybe that, if that's maybe you said, no. If you're looking, if it's an interest, again, I guess we want to talk about February, but reassign uses, those basically considered. And was the one.
Exactly.
Well, when all of us were growing up, it was, yeah.
During your bucket, things.
So that's the overview of kind of some thoughts about spaces. Again, this was city gets groundwork.
I do love that thinking about the multi-purpose versus specialized purpose. I think the period. I'm not sure where I come out on it, but I've thought a lot about someone who uses it off season a lot. And having that letter that it isn't very attractive. Off season is fine for me and beautiful no matter what, but it is if you have a very come with a clear eye, clean eye, you realize it's not very attractive. And it looks like I don't know. Doesn't even look like a campground because of,
Right.
but I'm not sure I want it to, so, but maybe that's asking too much for that space to be able to be balls to all people, so having that one dedicated space for camping and then for who's interested, just challenging you to think about those options.
Yeah, no, we'll get there. I mean, I think it's a matter of finding the balance, right? I mean, when the campers are there, it's a very good space too, so, right? So it doesn't feel welcoming at all. I mean, now you're sort of saying in the off season, we're seeing remnants of it, but not everyone feels like it's accessible or they're welcome.
Yeah,
You
I don't think that's a problem.
It
Just for the record,
goes in the center,
it's like a neighborhood.
It does, and it changes, because of the volumes of the campers. That's so I think that, what is in the off season.
will be different, and I think it could be more organized and more naturalized. But maybe even multi-purpose, edges are where other things are happening more readily.
Yeah, we see some.
Which one of your mic, please, sorry.
It should be on. It's not working.
Phil tried tapping it just to see. There you go. You just have to speak it. Yeah, there, it's working.
But, yeah, there's letters written, we need to look at, look at. Reading it up. Using it. Right, welcome to, welcome. Why? The edges. Bring it. Do this. Oh, this guy. How have we really use there's nothing.
I mean, and those ideas benefit everyone. You have campers as well, right? So it's maybe investing a little more on percentages and things that a little more accessible with visually. So maybe there's ideas that smaller pavilions that could be 2 picnic tables or something. Not everybody needs the entire pavilion for what they're doing, but it'd be nice for a family to get together and reserve a pavilion or canvas and be everything. It's a pavilion that looks out to the west, and so something like that would accommodate more users, accommodate a wide range of users, would be a little bit different than what the centers are now. But something that I'm in the city is just offering more and being flexible with their SAT and how do we reach with the city itself.
In the everything's on top of each other. It's all these different users, so it's not necessarily coordinated, and so we're seeing a lot of conflicts and way different from people who use the file. So I think we this space something that.
It does, and there's some conflict areas that we'll talk about for like the boat ramp, for example. When you look at the other side of the boat ramp, there's with the kayak racks. These are. In some ways, it's a little bit of a barrier. I mean, I know they're there to be able to easily get the water, but maybe they be repositioned or angled, and we can create a better access. Western side, so that maybe just relieve some of the tension all around the ramp as we motorized access. It'd be more directed to the western side. I know the water conditions are there a little bit different, a little more challenging, but there could be like relatively minor adjustments that could help sort of eliminate or reduce some of the comments. My same point about the battery, should get to parking. There's a way to the sidewalk there to dedicate space to create better walking conditions, better connectivity. Different. If we're good with this, we can work. A couple of slides here. Yeah, so these are some of the things that we're just working through, and we'll talk more about February is going to be an optimal layout location. How to activate the pavilion, that was a comment that came through. I feel like the building is pretty highly utilized and pretty well activated. So I mean, maybe that's not as much of a concern as making sure we have good parking, good organization for access to. And that's the next couple of bullets down, improve the traffic flow. These comments actually, so I'm not sure that utilizing the landscape to create a sense of space, instead of thinking differently about landscape. The waterfront access that you mentioned for not motorized access for boat ramp, potentially paddle boards, things like that. And then improving the amenities of the site.
So I'd like to also just think about I don't believe there's really guidance or policies or anything that is informing where structures are placed. And so, these benches that are put, to me, it feels like random places, find them very attractive, should we have some kind of design standards? Why not? But something to think about. Do we want more benches and picnic tables, or how do we think about structures, permanent structures? Versus movable structures? We talk about a pavilion. Is that a permanent structure? How do we think about that?
I guess the survey will tell us.
Well, even ourselves, I feel that.
The thing is, no more permanent structure, it's every certain space they would use.
I agree with that. I agree with that. No,
It's be contradicting what people are asking for, if you put permanent structures. Another one,
well, I agree with that. I don't know what the survey says, and I think the survey is one tool that we use when we develop our own recommendations. So personally, I get nervous when I think about additional permanent structures, whether they're benches or pavilions.
I agree with you.
Something says introduce site, and I'm trying to like, what's that?
Right, I think we need to address some of your outside ownership. So like, that's like, but some of it's not accessible, for people with. Mobility challenges. It should be more consideration given to. So just developing more accessible, wherever those facilities are, there's some places where maybe they're more appropriate than others. I think, we have the northern restaurant, which, is probably a good discussion. If that structure belongs there, it should be rehabilitated, or if one restaurant would suitable for the entire site. Or maybe a smaller restaurant facility that just serves, the pier, the boat ramp, and it's something that's down in that area that's dedicated for marine-based activities. Maybe it's the same occupancy, sort of be staying like the rest of their model or what we did with the pavilion. It is in the floodplain that they are totally big storm. And maybe that's just dedicated to that use, so that people more global and see could do the needs of restaurants, sure. The other uses of the park, or if we had the building restrooms that had one marine-based restaurant facility is just one of them. With some major limited construction, that should be. Because I'm concerned about the amount of structure, so I think the design of the structures too is important, aesthetic and how open an area they are. Structured. We've done projects with shaded sails and trees before, it just is like sits there for the season, and for the off season, it's not. So, there's considerations like that, I think, place with this. Unless those two visit parks, maintenance and the storage facility, I think we talk about that a little bit, maybe bring our last meetings, when looking at it, if there was such as a building or structure where that will be. Was to be house. To the outside of the floodplain, but that's probably something to talk about. So as well, what kind of footprint is needed with that? And then if just go about cellar, I think it's just what we're dealing with, sort of looking ahead.
I'm sorry, next slide.
Yeah, it's.
Sorry.
Let's do that. Yes, I think I already, I feel strongly about the community priorities and, I'm gonna think the surveys just to reinforce that process. As a group, I think exploring and being a discussion on current land uses would be useful. And I think really thinking about, are you going to, look at redefining or reallocating park spaces? We talked about underutilized areas at the top of the battery, we talked about inherent, increase today. And then what do we do to re-envision some of those spaces and uses and improve connectivity just without throughout the park itself? The more you have more cohesive, faster. Because I think that the layout of the RV sites and the connect sites and any adjustments there will flow out of this kind of process that we've been talking about. And thinking about the land use and the prioritization. So that's kind of the overview we brought in. Make sure we get you the updated version of the map is essentially the same. This is deal with the sheriff. And then that maybe there's any other questions. We'll stay with the team here about some correspondence.
I have a question. You talked about the green space that belong to the and how we can make them better. And you've done all the hardscape and amount of years. But if you're landscaping, do you have ideas on the trees that were planted? I know we have a gentleman in town who wants to come speak and talk about what we could plant at the pond for Getty, but could you supply information like that, the trees that would be appropriate if you're gonna line, let's say, East Road right over there up to the sail program? If you're at green space, what trees you would bring and something that keeps low so you don't block the views?
Yeah, that's a good, we'll get more today on it too, I think, I don't wanna get too formal about the way we think about it, you know, I like the idea of like rewilding, you know, and that was some of the idea around the pavilion, it was just bring in some natural edges. You know, when we first started in the building parking lot. I think we try to bring the same approach here, so look at shrub material, smaller trees, different types of trees. Most of the trees out there are the eastern red cedars, so it's a new evergreen tree.
Yeah.
Alyssa pointed out there are some deciduous trees, but the more deciduous trees you introduce, you know, maybe these challenges with shade and canopy, it's been changing the overall aesthetic. So I think that has to be kind of looked at in balance as to maybe there's a grove of trees that make sense, offers some shade. I think it has to be kind of carefully thought about, because I think we overplant, you know, particularly that one goal, and really change the character and kind of compartmentalize that landscape, but I think we should be careful not to go too far in that direction.
Well, I wasn't really thinking about on the Noah Weed, because you were talking about
The edges.
the edges, maybe along the road on the east end. But if you had a variety of trees, something that would grow tall, like something that is salt spray tolerant, if you would have that kind of information, or was that something that's for another time?
Yeah, we'll probably get into a little bit more, but I think some of the trees, we like to just look at what's going on out there today. So when I talk about rewilding or bringing those edges in, you know, we're mowing right down to the end, right, tree trail. Do we need to? And we're not necessarily using some of that space, it's just grass. Could be bringing, that's an even regular or a shadow bush install sometimes, it's like flowering or flowers. That tree could work in there, it's not too tall. There's high bush blueberry in there, there's some like viburnum in there. You know, because we just kind of rewild some of the edges with plant material that's already in sight. And just sort of stop mowing some areas and naturalism creates some habitat. So I think we can talk about that kind of treatment for some of the edges, and then maybe more purposeful plantings on the interior for some landscape areas and regulars or RVs. So I think we can grow in that discussion.
Okay, I guess what I'm wondering is that there's a vegetation that could be planted that softens the desert-like view of what the crowd in the off season, to keep the green on the perimeter, so you're not taking anything on it, but a different vegetation that might soften it.
From far, we're looking at it.
Well, when you drive into the
Yeah.
park, if you saw, I'm gonna call it green, it's just something to soften the view, even looking up to the hill, but you're not blocking the view on the hill down to anything.
Right,
That's what I guess I'm trying to get at, if there's any way to soften the
yeah,
look of it, but keeping it on the perimeter, like the green in your eye or whatever colors there, to soften the view, when you get up on the top, you're looking down at the brown grass and all the bare spots, but you're seeing color or something that's inviting on the perimeter, so particularly seeing the harshness of the view.
yeah, I think it's opportunity to do something. Sometimes that's not in a couple stages too, where sort of at the edge, but then also maybe, you know, as you kind of come into the view shed, there's ways to layer. You change that perspective. Yeah. Other questions?
Were you thinking about beaches when you were kind of assassinating things there? You thought about current state?
To honestly, we didn't spend a lot of time yet, but why don't we look and move back and see about something?
And
Can you
just
tell me specifically that just sort of
curious,
graph for neighbors or?
wondering, you know, they're rustic beaches, they're rocky, they're beautiful. Anything about access or oh, you know, path in the middle of the water that we can jump off like they have at green speed. Not to get too specific.
Well, let's go and look with an eye. I mean, I think think everyone appreciates the sense of this wildness there on those edges, and so be careful not to lose that. But can we improve some access and things like that?
Just my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm not bringing anything that's really actually curious from your fresh perspective. What you have thought about.
No, but we'll look at that, yeah.
What would be helpful for you in preparing for that next workshop? You know, listening to Richard talk about one of his ideas, and it would be helpful for us to put together our ideas, we probably all have ideas, rather than just coming that day with them. Should we put together some kind of document we'll all to put forward our pieces, maybe there's overlap and you version and give an answer to this.
Yeah, I would just caution you on that process.
Okay.
Right, if you live independently, you'll be able to process that. Without any vetting process by the committee, you're gonna all submit 5 independent ideas and Eric's gotta process that.
No, we would be putting it together, if we have to at some point bring forward our own individual ideas, and then we'll work through those. It'd be Cody is compiling them.
Sure. I think you might be suggesting bringing those individual ideas back to a meeting before sending them to Eric. That's something I would caution you about, of working outside of a meeting. Might get you in a little trouble there. That's all. Okay.
I'm not suggesting that we need. Thinking otherwise, we are moving with our to the workshop, and I'm not sure that's going to be most effective. So I think
I have my own ideas, which are in my brain.
right, exactly. Do you have any thoughts? Like bring those ideas forward in an organized way.
We're all on the same page, and make it easy for everyone. I can see the problem, we need to, everybody send in our own kind of tabulate them together to make it easier, but that's would be your goal. If you got 10 sheets or 5 sheets, we all have a different design and we handed them to you. What would you prefer?
We're comfortable with that. We're comfortable with you bringing, what's nice is if you bring your ideas on a piece of paper to the session. We don't need to see it necessarily in advance, because we're gonna work on it together, right? We're gonna. Liz and I are comfortable working with, to real-time input, and I think you need to hear each other's perspectives. What's sometimes challenging is somebody will bring it, on their phone, and they'll be scrolling through. If you print something out, and if you have kind of, these are my vegetation or views or whatever. These are the things that are really hard to me. It's great to come to that session with those. But in terms of seeing something in advance, I think we're prepared to talk about it at the table and sit down and try to help us. And if it means we need to, continue into that session, that's okay. I think it's more effective to sit as a group, hear the different perspectives. Bring as much of a kind of agenda of your own ideas as you can. That'd be great. I think we're going to be in a different setting, right, with the table where we get to sit. Are you comfortable drawing or sketching or sketch with you? I mean, the point is to kind of try to put these thoughts out for. At that session, we'll walk away with maybe 5 different ideas or 3. So say which one of these, and maybe 1 or 2 rise to the top, sort of for direction. And then we'll take that away and we'll try to fit templates and fit layouts and say, okay, well, what if the room was here? Or what if this area wasn't RV sites, but was 10 sites? What if we had cabins in this area instead of tents? All those ideas we can try to fit to a template based on a concept sketch.
I'm very comfortable with the idea that to workshop there, describe. That said, I think that us sharing our kind of, if not concrete design choices we would make, at least ideas we have that we have made up to investigate. Candidly, I think it also be really good to get your document ahead of that. Because I think the ability to think about you think about the ideas we have, us think about the ideas you have, even if we're talking about not necessarily a whole lot of time to work something in detail, but to have thought about it before we leave the room. I think we'll make for a better decision. It's like doing pre. And I suspect you would also like to hear what we have said, even if you're happy to respond on your feet.
Yeah, I mean, usually we would try to translate it, you know, onto paper, but as long as we're aligned with that, sure. Something that, yes. So the drafts, be happy to look at it as a big deal. I would say our goal is to focus on the bigger picture pieces, so we're probably not gonna talk about benches and gravy or trash or, you know, those are gonna come out of the process, but or, you know, if a 5% reduction in campers yields say another acre of open plans, those are the kind of conversations I think that we need to be working through. Or an additional, you know, can we give another acre because we found an acre on top of the battery that we're gonna appropriate differently, so now maybe we have more land than we think could be campers. Those are the sort of level of conversations, and what we try to do is set that into a drawing or sketch plan that reflects what if we did this here, how would that plan? But if there's sort of agenda items or big picture pieces you can send to us in advance. And we'll just, we'll pull the final version and then share it, so you'll have it today. We just have some numbers that were updated later this morning, so I should have a meeting on the session of the event.
If you sequencing, assume there's certain things that, or you can really talk about roadway placement or bathroom placement, would be good to know suggestions for RV placement, tent camping placement. He does want to inform me how to.
Yeah, they're kind of interconnected, right? So. So it's the goal to sort of maintain. You know, a total of 9 or 10 acres, roughly 15% of the 20 acres that you have, you know, it's camping. So it's leased to other people to use or we use. Is that an okay ratio? I don't know. If you're in a consensus on that, or you're working through that, but I think that's kind of the discussion. Do you want to expand the RV camping, could we expand tent camping or move it to a different mode? Or with a platform to some other the batteries.
So, this is for the committee, this makes me feel as though we're going to be working things out together. We have not had conversations as a committee about our own, like our vision and looking forward. Principles that we may be thinking about in terms of, there's a general consensus that there should be an expansion of camping or a reduction of camping. Only tent camping or only RV camping or any of that, and so this may serve as the mechanism for us to do that, or we may want to do that. John?
So once upon a time, we talked about not really laying down the guardrails for this effort. Until we had, so it's a new line of design principles, until we had this. And having said that, I think each of us could put forward our hypotheses about what the surface of us. In order. For the team of data to start thinking about how would they respond to those. Right, but we're not gonna be able to. And by the way, I would have to be, as I think that a little bit of concurrence of time is a good thing. But I don't think we can really lock them down until we've had the chance to see results of the survey. And so, striking mid-February 10th is the earliest that we'll be in position to talk about.
So do you think that we should have a meeting here to review the survey results and And go through all that, and then the next meeting would be there. We'll inform our decision around meeting schedule.
I don't know, I already have my feeling with the survey's gonna be, because it's not survey for them. And when we talk to people who they are. So the idea I'm going for, based on what I hear, what I've heard it before, and I assume your survey is gonna be very close. And again, it's only, if we get 30% of the return, only 30% of the return. Of the population, so if you have ideas, I think it's great to bring them, because some are not even a survey, some of them are also the survey. You know, we can tie all in, otherwise we're gonna keep pushing back and we keep having a meeting to go over the survey data, our ideas, and then have one meeting and then have another meeting to redefine. Drawings and everything.
Cassie, what do you think? The point of the exercise is this higher level of modeling, what would the space be like if it was as this? So it's not necessarily to be able to then one decision. But, I mean, we haven't done that. This is the first time we've seen that, where, we understood that half the card is musical space, and then it's broken percentages of, and so I really appreciate that. I think it's like being able to like look at it and talk through and then model that. I think it's interesting. So you're comfortable the next meeting attention, if it's February 10th, that could be at the workshop and maybe concurrent with the results from the. No,
Questions about survey results?
Yeah.
It would be, I would prefer to have them.
yeah, I hear, yeah,
I don't know what would be for me to discuss them,
right,
but if we have those, to inform our own thoughts, going into us doing that, I hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've come up with 3 or 4 plans myself. I had a major conflict with my heart. So there's going to be a lot of good thoughts going into this.
okay,
Are those results something that you can available to us?
yes, definitely.
So even if there's a meeting prior, we can come back.
Yeah, the next agenda item on here is actually talking about the survey, and so we'll be able to have a little bit more detail on why we think we can have those surveys, because also I think we'll be before February next, so that's in promise, so.
Sure, well, why don't I step down and read it again?
Right, thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you, Alyssa. Okay, the next item is an update on the community survey. So thank you, Ray, for all the work that you have done on this. Really appreciate it.
Well, so we've gotten, pretty steady responses since, we released that survey. And what I have in the memo, I actually updated it today when I checked before I came over here. We're up to 815 responses for the resident survey and up to 44 responses for the Fort Getty user survey. So our outreach just included a third-party vendor to distribute over 5,300 postcards, to Jamestown resident property and business owners. The postcard included the QR code, a direct URL, giving access to the survey. It's also on the town website on the front page. And then we put in reminders of the Jamestown Press that, hey, you have this postcard coming. And we did some outreach with our email system, mostly to people who had purchased resident passes at the recreation center this last year for the resident survey. And then outside of that, we do our bulk email, basically just, hey, this is what's going on in the rec department this month. We reminded everyone there as well that you will be receiving, if you are a resident, one of those postcards in the mail. And then we used that same system to email all the Fort Getty users, so 10 campers from 2025, and then RV residents from 2020.
And so that's like, it seems like around 15% response rate. I think it's pretty good. Yeah,
Can I just
Frank, could you remind me, how many responses will equal 100% for taxpayers and residents?
I don't have that exact number, but it's, you know, I think it's like around 5,500, 5,300, something between the two numbers.
John, I mean, those are in many cases duplicates, taxpayers and residents, voters, they're duplicates. And in general, the population, 5,200 people. And in general, the number of properties in Jamestown is 3,800. So I don't know if that offers you some context.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, that's the problem. You know that the number of mailers doesn't equal the number of respondents at 100%. I mean, my house is back.
It would be about 5,200, it sounds like, if there's 5,200 residents and 3,800 property owners. So maybe it'd be 6,200, I think that's.
I don't know. That's why I asked the question. I think that, I'm just curious, you know, in order to assess, you know, where are we thinking of percentage of the likely set of respondents? Up to 20.
I guess so. You haven't had a chance to kind of look at the results a little bit. Do you have any sense of, I'm not going to ask you, we're not going to ask you anything about telling us that results, but do you have a sense of how long it will take for us to do some analysis? Ray and I have a meeting with Jennifer Slattery, lead of City and Towns, who said that she would help with the analysis.
So I think to break down the questions that are simpler, it's gonna be easy. I think there is a lot of comments, and some of the comments were with big text boxes, I mean, there's paragraphs worth of information. I think that's gonna be the challenge to break down. But just the static questions that we have there, SurveyMonkey exports, and you can have summary data, you can have, it comes out with graphs, sometimes the graphs are a little, you have to kind of tweak them to make them work, but that portion shouldn't take too long to break down. It's gonna be all the individual responses that someone has to read, or you have to get through and try to pull some data from and do something with that data for make it presentable. That'll be a challenge for sure.
Some voting, we'll talk to Jennifer about how she might propose doing that. Once NT identified some of us can do that, we won't be knowing who we're looking at, so we have a good sense of what the voting could be. We might be able to over something. So we have a meeting on the 26th of February. They wanted to talk about our beach, this feels to have a newsletter that the ad that we put in the newspaper sent it to the school. So.
We can definitely look into doing that. I can reach out to the school and just ask about the process.
It makes that challenge.
I know that one thing, if it was just kind of, when we looked at the community survey, we looked at how many complete surveys we had, because it was still a long survey. And then we looked at, like, say, for example, we had 826 complete.
Sorry,
surveys.
Lisa, would you mind going to the microphone just if anybody's streaming? Thank you.
So we talked about looking at different scenarios, like I said, 826 surveys done. Like 650 of them were complete. So then the process happened when we looked at it and said, okay, what questions didn't they ask? Or didn't they answer? You know, why weren't they complete? And as it turned out, it was just that it was too bloody long. So it was kind of a progression of they would get to a certain point. It wasn't like they would jump to questions on water or access or Getty. It wasn't that kind of an incomplete survey. So that was interesting. So then you can then take the data that was answered on those extra 150 surveys and say, okay, it's valid information, even though they didn't answer the last questions. So, you know, you can look at, you can sort it that way. You can sort it by those that didn't, you know, put their name, or those that, you know, did do this, or, you know, so there's a lot of different ways we can look at it when you get the data.
How did you had a lot of open-ended responses on things. pages, all your farms, everybody wants farms. The farms. So, I mean, you can look at that in word search, you know, you can look at, say, open space, you can look at it and say amenities, you can look at, you know, so there's different ways to look at it, and then when that's highlighted, I mean, you're still gonna have to read it all. You know, and make sure that you have, you know, all the themes, but, you know, if you can read through it maybe once and look at those themes. And AI, so I don't have these issues with using AI of all the laws. All right, you do that. Okay, 5 minutes will be done. Thank you. Thanks, and so. Okay, any questions for Ryan?
Yes, I don't know if this is for you personally to write, but in compiling the data, can any of us be used? I'm not sure exactly how it's going to be done with what we know.
I mean, anybody could be of use, it just depends on how we want to go about going through that data, if it's gonna be. You know, what was nice about kind of a third party person doing it is it kind of takes away any. Not that I think anybody would do anything, but it just, these people are not associated at all with the. You know, survey or Getty or Jamestown or anything, so what they give to you is just. You know, not, like I said, I don't think anybody would do that here, but someone from the outside, they could question or say something like that, it would eliminate that, but. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
So we do have everybody's.
You do, and that's, she's the native person, the city. So she's been part of the process throughout. And she advised everyone of the property. All right. Next item, public comments. Are there any scheduled requests for comment?
No scheduled.
Any non-scheduled requests? Lisa, are you still on the, are you an executive a member of this meeting still? Okay. I just want to know if it was minor doing it at the end, I want to. Director of Planning and Zoning. Oh. Oh, great, nice to meet you. Any comments that I can teach yourself? Thank you, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy Latender. I arrived here via Westerly. And the last 6.5 years, I'm also a land use attorney. So, I've been involved in a lot of projects, a lot of facilitating a lot of work sessions and workshops with the public, and sounds to me like you're reaching out and getting as much input as you possibly can. I look forward to the outcome.
Thank you, welcome. And I'll just take that moment to thank Lisa officially. I think this may be the last meeting where you're here as a member of the committee. Thank you for all of your excellent work over these many years, and it's been a pleasure to overlap in this particular very important work that I know you care about. So thank you so much for the. We're going to be getting a lot of celebrations over the next few weeks. Okay, the next item is communications received. Is there a motion to accept the communication from Pat's son-in-law dated December 15th, 2025?
So.
Second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Sorry.
Is there a motion to accept the letter received from Richard Kingsley on behalf of the Jamestown Community Preservation and Commission Committee dated January 6, 2026? Is there a second?
Second.
Let's move over Richard and second by John. All in favor? Opposed? So the next item is agenda and committee schedule moving forward. So at the last meeting, we were told potential dates, and one of them really didn't work for everyone. I think it was January 7th was proposed. And that could be York, so we thought maybe either a later date or the next date that was offered was February 10th. And then the one after that was February 24th, which didn't work. So do people think we need a meeting before February 10th? Some people have the results necessary.
You kind of are the 10th.
By the time before that, I think it would be challenged.
So it is. You have to, there's something else. If it goes on 22nd.
Well, the meeting with the janitor is Sunday is the 26th, so that we have a chance to then. Gather it all together and we place for her that Monday, so we move with her at least a meeting.
The government said, would we have any generic? Like, generic situation, which is.
I'm thinking that we will, I can't figure that as a promise, but I'm thinking we'll have the results for the package that will go out prior to the 10th. So. I don't think we need another meeting itself, that is before the 10th. And the 10th would be, if it works for you as a date we would use for the workshop.
So I don't think we need another meeting for the 10th. I do think that it would be nice to get whatever info we can from the survey, even unprocessed.
Okay, and then I have February 26th here as a possibility for the next date. That work for people at 1 o'clock? That's a Thursday.
Perfect.
I think it would.
Yeah, I think you would.
You did.
You did, yeah. Great, so maybe we can just go forward with those 2 dates.
So February
February
10th at 1 p.m.
Yeah.
again, and the 26th.
Yeah.
And the 10th, I'm sorry, would be a workshop
Mhm.
in the conference room?
Yes,
Okay.
or the one. Right, any other agenda items that people would like to put forward? We have to consider the rules and the work. And then I'll just note that big thanks to Cassie for taking the lead on putting together some of the information and getting that report started. There are sections of the report that people would like to focus on. Bill, I know you've already agreed to be the finance person, including financials. Not do the upfront piece and we'll think more about that, but if there's anything that's of tremendous interest, please let me know. Still have some time. But thank you, guys, great work, really appreciate it. Okay, is there anything else? Is there a way to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
The trouble they can have. Yes. They need to put it the same Jennifer's that. We're sitting right working for the fixing the boilings for Ashley.
Okay.
So that.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, 6 in the meeting. It'll be different. I said it was a performance before. So this.
Yeah, it would just be a draft.
They're right, we should have bar, then we're also. Right. There was another one. Yeah.